As Vice President of the United States, Al Gore was responsible to his president, to his nation, and to his people. But today, 10 years out of office, he answers to an even larger body. That's because climate change, it's not a national issue, it's a global one. And Al Gore is spreading that inconvenient truth around the world. That film, it started a movement. In fact, it's now mandatory curriculum in 5 countries around the world for students just like you. Educator, statesman, visionary. There is no doubt that Al Gore is the commander-in-chief of our environmental movement. He became a leader young, a reporter for the US Army in Vietnam by just 21. By 28, he was ready to stir things up in Washington. He ran for office, won a seat, and got Congress to start talking about climate change for the first time ever. But that was just the beginning of his global agenda. Of course, you know Al Gore as the 45th Vice President of the United States. For 8 years, he led that country with President Bill Clinton, and in 2000, nearly got elected president himself. New millennium, new chapter. An inconvenient truth is born. The documentary spurred the world into a frenzy with its message. It made $40 million worldwide. It won 2 Academy Awards, and it helped Al Gore win the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. Please welcome our shameless idealist, Al Gore.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm really proud to be here and really inspired by these young people. It's an amazing movement, and congratulations to you for inspiring this movement.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we are so excited to have a chance to talk with you, and I'd love to start from the beginning, quite literally. The day that you were born, the Nashville City local paper had the front headline, "Mr. Gore, here he is on page 1, end quote. Can you tell us the story behind the headline?
Well, I think my father was a congressman for 10 years before I was born, and I guess the story behind that is that he was excited about me being born and had a friendship with the reporter for that newspaper, and I'm sure it's that friendship that led to a little bit of over-exuberance in the reporting.
Now it's a lot of pressure when your birth is announced on page 1 of the paper, and a lot of kids...
I was completely unaware of it.
Yeah, good points. But a lot of kids dream of being, a teacher, a doctor. Did you always want to be president?
No, but the longer version of that no is that when I was a little kid, I wanted to do what my dad did, and I actually did think that I would grow up to be like him and go into politics, and who knows how far that would go. But when I got older, it was a difficult time for the United States, and by the time I graduated from high school, the Vietnam War was just about to move into high gear, and all through my college years, I was one of those who opposed the Vietnam War, and I watched President Johnson, President Nixon. Then my father was defeated because he was against the war and for the Voting Rights Act and civil rights in general. And I was kind of disillusioned with politics. So I actually took a different turn and decided that politics would be the last thing that I ever did.
Every childhood is unique.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your father, so yours especially so. In fact, you lived part of your life in a DC hotel suite with visiting world leaders having dinner.
Suite is an overstatement.
DC hotel,
but,
absolutely. Yeah. But what was that world like through the eyes of a child?
Well, it was fascinating, and as you say, every childhood is different, but every child knows that unique childhood, and so I didn't know anything else. I spent all of my summers on a farm in the South in Tennessee, and then went back during the school year to this hotel room, and my parents would have these other senators over and presidents would call my dad on the telephone, and he used to take me with him to his work, like most dads do with their kids, and it was a great opportunity to learn.
So what was your earliest memory visiting Congress?
Actually, the one that stands out was when I was 4 years old. My dad had been elected to the U.S. Senate, and he took me onto the floor of the Senate with him. I think it was probably a violation of the rules. One of the pages brought a message from the vice president who was presiding in the Senate, who happened to be Richard Nixon. Wow. And I thought it was for my dad, but it was for me. And,
okay.
And he was inviting me to come down up to the podium and he put me in his lap there. And I'm in the Democratic Party, but I'll tell you that experience deprived me of the opportunity so many Democrats had later to just be so constantly mad at Richard Nixon. I always thought he was a nice man.
Let's go back to that summer you mentioned in '69, the Vietnam War. There were riots across the country. Your father, Tennessee senator, running on an anti-war platform, extremely tight race.
Yeah.
Now, how did that influence your decision to eventually enlist?
Well, it was it was an interesting time for me. I had taken part in some of those demonstrations, and all of my friends and my peer group were opposed to the war. And you would get a college deferment, but when you graduated from college, your number was up unless you figured some way out of it. And a lot of my friends figured different strategies to get out of it. And
you probably could have, as the son
I
of
probably
a senator.
could. I probably could have. And in all honesty, I certainly thought about that. My draft board was in the small town of Carthage, Tennessee, only 2,000 people. I knew all of the other guys in my age group that were eligible that month. And if I found some fancy way to get out of it and one of them took my place, say he got killed over there, and a couple years later I'm walking down Main Street and I run into that family, what are they going to feel like? What am I going to feel like? It just seemed to me that even though I was opposed to the war, since my country was in the war and my number was up, I had a duty to answer that call. I'm not trying to make it into a heroic decision. It really wasn't. It was just a very carefully thought through decision.
Well, and as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, you're often asked your view of war and conflict, but looking back at that experience as a 21-year-old, how did that shape your view of war and peace in this world?
Well, before I went to Vietnam, I had a kind of a black and white, simplistic view of it. And I thought the war was wrong. I thought my country had made a terrible mistake. And that view really, that conclusion didn't really change. But when I got to know the Vietnamese people and I saw in the hearts and faces of the South Vietnamese people with whom I became particularly close friends, everything became a lot more textured, and instead of black and white, there were shades of gray. It was much more complicated, and I think it taught me a tolerance for complexity in these kinds of questions that I certainly did not have before I went over there and had those experiences.
Now, it was while you were at Harvard that you had a professor who first opened your eyes to the science of climate change.
Yeah.
We've all had amazing teachers in our lives, but what about that person spoke to you?
Wow, he was amazing. His name was Roger Revelle, and he was a truly great scientist and a great teacher. And I've since in my life run into many other people who were also inspired by the same teacher. He was the first scientist to propose measuring CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. And he caused me to really focus on this a lot, and I stayed in touch with him. And I helped organize the first hearings on global warming and invited that professor to come and be the leadoff witness in the hearings. And I'll tell you, I really thought, because of the experience I'd had as a student with him opening my eyes and inspiring me and making it so obvious and so clear, I thought, okay, you come here to the Congress and you tell these people what you told me, and we're off to the races. Well, he came, and he only had like 30 minutes instead of a whole semester, and it was over with, and I looked at my colleagues, and, you know, they weren't really affected by it. And it was frustrating to me that the inspiration that he had put in my heart and the insight that he had put in my mind was not easy to transfer. And so in a way, that hearing really began increasingly strenuous efforts on my part to get the facts out.
No, but I'm curious, because during your time in the White House, when you face lobbyists and campaign fundraising and all of the challenges, how hard is it to advance a moral issue like climate change?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And remember, I was not president, I was vice president, and the distinction there is that I really did not have the ability to say, okay, this is going to be our #1 priority, we're going to focus on this, and we're going to do these other things, but we're going to focus on this. I had to work indirectly to convince President Clinton. He was and is a great friend, and he was responsive, but it became only one of the issues that we pursued. And so it is difficult to keep a steady course on an overriding priority that's really based on a moral imperative.
Was there one time when you felt particularly handcuffed?
Well, there were several times, yes. I've never violated the confidence of my private communications with President Clinton. I will simply say that he was always supportive of my efforts on this. But I remember after going to the Kyoto conference in 1997, I was advised by almost everybody, don't go, it's a political killer, it's not going to succeed. But I said, well, look, this is something I get to decide. Am I going to, because I can decide to go or not. So of course I went and negotiated there, and along with others, came up with a formula that broke the deadlock, and we got this treaty. And I was really excited about it. I was thrilled. I went back to the United States and could get hardly anybody in the United States Senate to be in support of the treaty. And so I felt, to use your word, handcuffed, in the sense that I had done my part, and it seemed obvious and clear to me, but getting enough senators to vote for it was almost impossible.
We have an audience of students, and they're very excited that you're with them today, and I know that they want to ask you questions.
Yeah, great.
So, please.
So we're all curious to know, if you had been elected president in the 2000 election instead of George Bush, how do you think the political landscape of the country would be different?
Well,
I was asking tough questions on the record.
Well, not that tough. I like to think it would be completely and totally different. But then Governor Bush and I had completely different sets of priorities and points of view on virtually all of the major issues, and so it would have been very different. I would have made different kinds of mistakes.
Can you tell us the story of how An Inconvenient Truth was born?
Yeah, I started giving a slideshow on global warming back when I was in the United States Senate. And in those days, I had 3 Kodak projectors with 3 carousels of slides, and this doodad device that would coordinate the 3 of them, and they would fade in and fade out. And it was actually a pretty slideshow, but it was really unwieldy. And when I left the White House, I took out those carousels and started the slideshow again. And I'd gotten rusty, and I put in the first time I did it, the slides were upside down and backwards. And so I made the decision to shift over to computer graphics, and it was the 21st century, by the way. Somebody who saw the slideshow after a few years said, hey, that ought to be made into a movie. And to show you how much I knew about it, I was completely opposed to the idea.
Interesting.
I didn't think that it made any sense, really and truly. Little did I know that actually they have people in Hollywood who know what they're doing and can really do creative things. But it wasn't my idea to make it into a movie. I had to be sold on it.
Well, you said you've given the slideshow 1,000 times since the 1980s. Does it ever frustrate you that you still need a slideshow to get people to pay attention to climate change?
Well, I passed the point of frustration a long time ago. Okay. I'm sort of in some other realm now, and
okay.
I'm used to it. And nature doesn't do bailouts. You can't repeal the laws of physics. When we put 90 million tons of this global warming pollution up there every 24 hours, it does have an effect, and it is having an effect. So it's not a question of frustration. It's not about, if it was frustration, it would be about me. It's not about me. It's about the reality that we are facing.
Now, we here call you a shameless idealist, but you've also been called a brutal realist, even a pessimist, for the incredibly dire predictions on an inconvenient truth. When you know these statistics are not in your favor, how do you keep fighting this fight?
Well, I can't not do it. It's there to be done. It has to be done. And there's another reason, Craig, that ultimately the change is going to come when the people themselves are convinced, to the point where politicians in every state, province, region, country understand that their constituents are demanding that they act. Now, that's the hardest way to get something done, but where this issue is concerned, I'm convinced it's probably the only way to get it done. But what that means, by the way, is that young people are on that same level playing field. You can make as big a difference as anyone by helping to change the opinion of those in your communities. Start with your families, and then your communities and your schools and your network of contacts and your friends, both real and digital, the groups overlap, I know, but really, really, you can make a huge difference.
Now, we have a fascinated group of students here listening to all this, but we also have students who wished they could be here to ask you questions. And so we posted it, and we have a question from a young person around the world.
Great.
Hi, Mr. Gore. My name is Marwa, and I was wondering, would the Middle East be more democratic if the world stopped buying its oil?
Oh, what a great question. You know, I don't really know, but I think the odds are that it would have a much better chance of democracy and freedom if it did not have what some people call the resource curse. You know, having mineral wealth or oil wealth that tempts those in power to control it and create oppressive structures that make sure they stay in control. That's a common enemy of democracy. It's one of the reasons why we need to break that dependence and shift to renewable sources of energy and get off of this addiction to oil and coal and gas and other kinds of carbon fuels.
Now, Mr. Vice President, the first time I ever had the pleasure to meet you, I was 13 years old, and you invited me to your home, the official residence, for dinner to meet your kids and to talk to them about getting involved in social issues.
I remember that so well, Craig. You started when you were 12, and it was maybe less than a year after that that I called up and invited you to come down. And I was so anxious for my own kids, some of whom are your age, to interact with you. I have been a fan of yours. I don't want to give you a big head, but I think it's really special when a young person, as young as you were when you started this, develops a really pure passion for fighting injustice. I had a teacher when I was young who used to say that you face the same choice in life over and over again. It's a choice between the hard right and the easy wrong. And when you see injustice, it's often hard to make the right decision and say, I'm going to speak out and do something about that. And that's what you did. There was a great poet in the United States many years ago, Wallace Stevens, who wrote a poem with the words, after the last no comes a yes, and on that yes, the future of the world depends. It's true today, and it's true for each one of you. And if you take that decision in favor of the hard right and listen to your hearts and fight injustice and fight for a world that has a clean environment and a wonderful, sustainable future that creates opportunities for justice and progress, then really and truly the future of the world depends upon that yes in your hearts.
Our shameless idealist, Al Gore. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.